Okay, so I want to kick things off today with a little mental exercise. Let's imagine a filing cabinet.
Right.
You know, the one we all have in our heads for pop culture. You see a certain art style, you hear a word, and you just instinctively, open a drawer and toss it in.
It's how we organize things. We love our categories.
Exactly. So if I say the word Yuri to, let's say, a general audience or even a pretty savvy anime fan, which drawer does that usually go into?
Oh, yeah, I know this one. It goes straight into the genre drawer, probably the girls' love section. And if we're being, brutally honest, it might get shoved into a subfolder labeled niche or maybe aesthetic.
Aesthetic or
Yeah.
even, something a little more loaded.
hmm
It's often seen as this very specific kind of tropey thing. Girls in school uniforms, soft lighting, lots of blushing, and that's about it. But today, we are going to take that entire filing cabinet and essentially just tip it over.
Consider it dismantled.
Yeah, because the source material we have today, this stack of articles and research you've pulled, is just fascinating. It completely rejects the idea that Yuri is just a category.
It does. It treats it more like a philosophy.
Philosophy, yes.
Yeah.
The text we're looking at reads less like a genre guide and more like a manifesto on narrative structure and emotional truth. The argument here is that true Yuri isn't defined just by who the characters are, two women, but by a specific kind of narrative commitment.
And that word commitment, it just jumps off the page, doesn't it?
It really does. It's so intense. The source material basically grabs you by the shoulders and says, look, this isn't a game. It argues that if you strip away all the tropes, what you're left with is an exercise in emotional sincerity.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just talking about cartoons or manga today. We're exploring what this text calls the go all in or don't go at all principle. We're going to dissect why these stories, when they're done right, prioritize emotional authenticity over spectacle.
And this is the part I can't wait to get to. We're going to look at why subtext, that thing fans have survived on for decades, is actually seen as a failure of the medium in this framework.
It's a bold stance, for sure. But the logic, I think, holds up.
I love that. We're moving from will they, won't they to they must. And I'm excited because the tone of this research isn't about teasing. It's about how love between women is portrayed as, ordinary and real and structurally different from your typical romance.
So where do we start with a manifesto like this?
I guess with the core definition, right?
We have to.
Yeah.
And the source is incredibly strict here. It states very clearly, Yuri is a portrayal of emotionally meaningful relationships between women. But here's the kicker. It's centered on sincerity rather than spectacle.
Sincerity rather than spectacle. Okay, that sounds really poetic, but let's unpack what that actually means. Because the text leads with a pretty aggressive statement. Yuri is not a tease.
Which is a direct shot at a lot of mainstream media, isn't it? We've
Yeah.
all seen shows where two female characters have this, intense chemistry. They share meaningful glances. The camera lingers.
You have to share a bed because there's only one room at the end.
Exactly. That old chestnut. All the tropes are there. But then nothing happens. Or worse, it's played off as a joke. That's spectacle. That's using the aesthetic of intimacy to hook an audience without doing the work.
It's like borrowing the heat without actually lighting the fire.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And our source argues that when Yuri works, it works because it treats the connection as real, not hypothetical. It's not playing games. And this leads to, I think, the most important structural point, that Yuri exists outside heteronormative pressure.
Okay, heteronormative pressure. That's a big academic phrase. What does the text mean by that in, a storytelling context?
It means the story doesn't need male validation to exist. It doesn't need to rely on gender hierarchies or, traditional romantic scripts to function. Think about a standard rom-com. There's usually a script, right? The chase, the conquest.
There's a hunter and the hunted. The guy has to win the girl. It's almost like transactional.
Exactly. And that script is often based on these really old ideas of how men and women should interact. Dominance and submission, pursuer and pursued. But this text says no. Two women are allowed to be the full emotional center of a story without any of that.
That is such a refreshing idea, the center of gravity. In so many other stories, a relationship between women is a side plot. It's flavor. It happens while the main plot is going on. But here, the relationship is the narrative.
It's the engine. And because it's the engine, its defining feature has to be authenticity. I mean, if you strip away the male gaze, if you stop asking, how does this look to a guy? And you strip away the need to perform for an audience, what are you left with?
You're left with two people. Just
Yes, precisely. And that raw connection It just operates differently. This is where the research gets really cool about the mechanics of how these relationships build. The text contrasts it with standard romance, specifically intimacy versus conquest.
This was the part that made me rethink how I watch movies. In so many traditional romances, the language is about getting the other person.
Dominance.
Yeah.
Even if it's playful, I will make you mine.
Right. Running through the airport to stop the plane, the boombox, it's all very loud, it's public, it's a conquest.
But the source argues that the emotional language of Sincere Yuri is all about intimacy. Closeness isn't built by chasing someone down. It's built by, and I loved this list shared time, mutual attention.
And quiet moments. That one really stood out to me.
Why is that?
Because in a writer's room, quiet moments usually get cut, right? They feel slow, they feel like nothing is happening.
But that's the brilliance of it. The text argues that relying on quiet moments requires confidence. You don't need fireworks to keep the audience engaged. You just need two characters existing in the same space, understanding each other. It's about being with rather than doing
Being
to.
with. That feels so much more grounded. It explains why the pacing in some of the best of these works feels so different. It's not rushing, it's lingering.
It's atmospheric.
Mm.
And that atmosphere allows for something the text calls resonance versus hierarchy. This is a huge point.
This was fascinating because a common critique, usually from people who don't quite get it, is, well, if you take away the gender difference, where's the friction? Where's the spark?
Right. They assume that for a relationship to be dynamic, you need opposites in a power struggle. But the text says that while Yuri often has contrast, one is reserved, one is expressive, these differences aren't about power.
In a traditional story, the grounded one would tame the wild one.
Yes, or one person changes the other. It becomes a control dynamic. But here, the text says these differences create resonance. Think of it like a chord in music.
Mm-hmm.
Two different notes played together create a sound richer than either one alone. They amplify each other.
I love that. They're vibrating at the same frequency, but maybe different pitches?
Exactly. And that links to a really specific point about femininity. In some older works, there was this pressure to assign a male role and a female role to the couple.
The whole butch femme stereotype, or just forcing that template on them. Like, so who wears the pants?
Which is such a reductive question.
Yeah.
The text argues that in Sincere Yuri, femininity isn't diluted or replaced. It can exist fully on both sides of the relationship. Neither woman has to, perform masculinity to make the relationship fit.
They can both just be themselves.
Yes. And the visuals back this up. The source mentions things like soft lighting, symbolic environments, the focus on hands touching. It's emphasizing the internal feeling over the external action.
It's almost like the camera is inside their heads instead of watching them from the bushes.
Which is why the gaze is so important. It's an internal gaze looking at each other, rather than an external one looking at them.
Yeah.
It changes the viewer from a voyeur into a witness.
That's a huge distinction, voyeur versus witness. Okay. So we've defined the terms, we've got the dynamic, now we have to get to the hard part, the rule, the ultimatum.
The go all in or don't go at all.
Yes.
This is the sincerity check. And honestly, this is where the text gets a little combative with the history of the genre.
It feels like a direct call-out to the whole era of subtext. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up on shows where you knew the characters were in love, it was obvious, but the writers would never let them say it.
They lived in the subtext.
Yeah.
And look, for a long time, historically, that was all people had. It was a survival mechanism. You imply it so you don't get censored.
Sure.
But this manifesto is basically arguing we're past that.
Mm-hmm.
It says pretty brutally that subtext without resolution is a failure.
The language is so strong. It says implication without acknowledgement drains its power.
It drains the power because it breaks the contract of authenticity.
Yeah.
I mean, if the defining feature is emotional truth, which we said at the start, then ambiguity is the enemy of that truth. If the characters are feeling something profound, but the narrative refuses to let them acknowledge it, then the narrative itself is being dishonest.
It's lying to the characters and it's lying to the audience.
Exactly. So the requirement for clarity isn't just about fan service. It's about narrative integrity. The strongest stories have to resolve into clarity. The characters have to acknowledge what they feel. The bond has to stabilize. It can't just hang in this eternal maybe state.
Oh, that eternal maybe is so frustrating. It's like writers are afraid that if the characters actually get together, the show is over.
Which is a fear based on conflict-driven storytelling. If there's no chase, there's no story. But this framework argues the relationship is the story. Being together is the point.
So does that mean every story needs a big dramatic confession in the rain? Because
Mm,
sometimes that kind of clarity can feel forced too.
no, and the text is careful about that. It says this doesn't require drama or tragedy. It requires honesty. It's not about high stakes like will the world end?
Hmm.
It's about the stakes of am I being true to this person?
I think that's a trap a lot of writers fall into. They think to make a relationship serious, they have to make it tragic.
The bury your gaze trope.
Exactly. It's like, look how serious this is. Someone died.
Right. But the go all in principle says that if Yuri is present, it must be sincere. If sincerity isn't possible, if the writers aren't brave enough, the text argues it shouldn't be used at all. Don't use the aesthetic if you won't commit to the reality of it.
If you cannot be sincere, do not go there. That is a tough standard, but I respect it. It stops things like queerbaiting dead in its tracks.
It demands respect for the characters and for the audience.
Let's pivot a little to the person on the other side of the screen, the audience. Why does this kind of sincerity matter so much to the people watching?
The source touches on this idea of recognition. Communities form around these stories not just because they're entertaining, but because people find language for emotions they didn't know how to name.
I found that really touching. The idea that you might feel something, this pull towards someone, but until you see it reflected in a story that takes it seriously, you might not even realize it's a valid way to feel.
It becomes a safe space for identity exploration. You can just watch these dynamics play out, the resonance, the quiet moments, and see what lands for you, without any pressure to label it immediately.
Speaking of resonance, the text brings up relational truth. This kind of explains why fans can be so obsessive, right? Even when stories were ambiguous, fans would write these huge essays to prove the love was real.
That's relational truth versus canon necessity. The fans are engaging through interpretation. They're arguing that the feeling between the characters matters more than whether the studio officially stamped it as canon.
It's like they're saying, I know what I'm seeing and I know what this feels like. You can't tell me it isn't real.
Exactly. But, and I have to play the expert for a second, the source does include a gentle warning. It reminds us that healthy engagement knows the difference between representation and projection.
How so?
Yuri is meaningful because it depicts connection, not because it's a substitute for real life. It can be easy to get lost in the perfect resonance of fiction because, well, real relationships are messy. They have boring moments that aren't quietly intimate. They're just boring.
Right. It's affirmation, not substitution. The fiction can help you understand your reality, but you can't live there.
And that leads to the ultimate goal described in the text. And honestly, this is my favorite part of this entire deep dive. The goal isn't to be radical. The goal is to be ordinary.
Yes, this struck me as the most revolutionary part. The text says Yuri is at its best when it allows love between women to be ordinary, serious, joyful, complicated, and
Let's
just.
look at that list again. It says not exceptional, not forbidden, not symbolic, just true.
That not forbidden part is huge. So much media about women loving women is framed entirely around the forbidden aspect, the secrecy, the shame.
Which casts this shadow over everything. It implies this love only exists in the dark. By striving for ordinariness, the genre is actually doing something much bolder. It's saying, this belongs in the light, this belongs in the everyday.
It belongs in the grocery store buying milk.
Yes.
It belongs on the couch paying bills or just watching TV.
Exactly. It humanizes the connection rather than exoticizing it. It takes it out of that fetish drawer we talked about at the start and puts it squarely in the life drawer.
And that's where it belongs. It's not a spectacle for someone else. It's a life for two people to live.
Beautifully put.
So if we look back, we started with this idea that Yuri is just a genre of girls love cartoons. But we've ended up somewhere totally different.
We really have. We went from a definition of sincerity to a critique of hierarchy. We looked at why subtext fails without resolution and why quiet moments are actually narrative powerhouses.
And finally, we arrived at this demand for ordinariness. The idea that these stories don't need to be tragedies to be worth telling.
It's really a lesson in narrative bravery, isn't it? It's about stripping away the aesthetic or the joke to reveal a human connection that stands on its own. It's saying two women just connecting is enough to hold the weight of a story.
It is. They don't need a war or a man to fight over or a magical apocalypse. They just need each other.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, to our own lives, I think there's a profound takeaway here.
What's that?
Well, we live in a world full of situationships, right? Ambiguous connections, ghosting, keeping things casual to avoid getting hurt. We love subtext in our real lives because subtext is safe. If I never say I love you, I can never really be rejected.
Oh, totally. Subtext is the default language of modern dating. We're all trying to be the cool girl or the chill guy who doesn't care too much.
We treat our own lives like a spectacle, where we're afraid to be real. But the Yuri principle we discussed today says, that is a failure of courage. The manifesto says if you cannot be sincere, it should not be used. So maybe we should apply that to our own understanding of emotional truth.
Wow, that is uncomfortably direct, but probably necessary.
It is. So here's the thought to leave you with. In your own life, with your own connections, are you relying on the spectacle of a relationship or the sincerity of one? Are you living in the subtext to stay safe? Because the lesson from these stories is go all in or don't go at all.
High stakes for a Tuesday. Go all in. I think I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. Thanks for guiding us through this, and thanks to everyone for listening to Deep Dive.
See you next